Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 300 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on lessons learned from 300 episodes. And it is Sunday, the 8th of December 2024 as I record this. So this is a massive landmark episode because we're finally celebrating the big 300, which I'm so excited by. It's absolutely brilliant that the podcast has actually lasted this long and we've covered so many amazing topics every single Monday without fail since the 11th of November 2019. So the podcast has been going for over 5 years now, and I'm really happy with that. I think it's brilliant. I'm really excited for the future, but I've learned a lot along the way. I've learned a lot about mental health. I've learned a lot about psychology. I've learned a lot about the people that work in psychology. So I'm really excited to learn these lessons and share them with all of you because this is going to be a brilliant episode and a brilliant way to wrap up episode 300 and talk about the future of the podcast. So this is going to be a brilliant episode and I'm really, really looking forward to it. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is, lack of information doesn't discourage confident decisions. Like it or not, it's near impossible to have every piece of information about a given situation, whether there's something that's going on at work, a news event, or a relationship. Yet, we're not always great at acknowledging that, not knowing what we don't know, as Socrates puts it. There's even a theory, the Dunning killer effect, addressing our lack of self-awareness in this area, suggesting that people with particularly limited knowledge of a subject area are likely to vastly overestimate their abilities. In a new study, a team looks at what happens when we believe we have adequate information when making a decision. They find that people rarely pause to consider what information they might be missing, making them feel just as competent as anyone to make thoughtful, sensible decisions that surely anyone would agree with. Okay, so there are a few areas of social psychology that I really enjoy learning about, and one of them is very much about self-awareness and a lack of self-knowledge because humans are horrific at knowing what we will actually know in ourselves, which is actually quite interesting considering that we live with ourselves, we're around ourselves 24/7, etc. But in reality, we actually don't know ourselves very well whatsoever, and this we can see in therapy contexts. For example, people don't recognise their own fully thinking patterns, their own biases, but also in our everyday social lives, because there's always going to be times when our friends point stuff out, and we're like, oh wow, that's so true about me, I didn't know that. And I also remember in my first year of my undergrad, I learnt about the hidden profile, which is basically this idea but sort of jacked up in the business context, because what happens is that like different people won't share their own unique information that they know about someone and that can really inhibit decision making processes. So I think the takeaway from this psychology news section is that it's really important that we do pause from time to time, and especially when making a decision, and just think, right, what do I know? What don't I know? And maybe this is something that we can think about in our decision making because, yes, we're still going to have to make decisions, maybe we can be more accepting that we aren't as smart as we know. We don't know everything, and that's okay. And sometimes we just need to try and find out that information before we make a decision. So the second one is new trial shows vitamin D's benefits for depression. Now that shoulder days are here, at least in the UK, many of us will be taking additional vitamin D supplements until sunny days return. Vitamin D, which our body creates upon exposure to sunlight, is important for both our bones, maintaining a healthy immune system, and according to research, staving off depression. Existing work has linked vitamin D deficiency with an increased risk of developing major depression disorder. And some studies have suggested that supplements may help to reduce symptoms. A new clinical trial published in Psychological Medicine adds a weight to this idea. The team behind it find that participants with depression who have higher vitamin D concentration in their blood after 7 months made the largest clinical improvement of the cohort. Brain scans comparing supplementers to controls suggest this could be down to maintenance of white matter wiring between the right frontal parietal and medial visual networks, areas that play a key role in mental health. Okay, so that's quite an interesting one. I could definitely say that definitely not a great amount that I can actually add to this one, but it is interesting because it does show that there is some biological stuff going on with depression, but I don't know how this fits in with the larger literature, especially because there's so much overwhelming evidence that actually says that depression doesn't have a biological basis. So it's interesting. It's interesting. I think that it'd be quite funny actually for doctors to prescribe depressed people vitamin D supplements in sort of antidepressants, because if vitamin D benefits do work and if they're more effective than antidepressants, then that could really throw like good 50, 80 years of so-called literature on its head. So it's still interesting. And yep, and Reed and Moncrief 2022 is still a brilliant paper that I highly recommend whenever you come across depression research, especially the biomedical model explanation of depression. It's a brilliant caveat. So the last one is not going out the new normal? The COVID-19 lockdowns fundamentally changed the way we live. Many people started working from home, we saw friends and family less. At times, outdoor activity was limited altogether. Many of these behaviours were cited as contributors to low mood and poor mental health at the time. Yet, a new study suggests that we may still be engaging in them to a larger extent than pre-COVID. Drawing data from the American Time Use Survey, Eric Morse and team looked at the daily egg activity of over 34,000 Americans from 2019 to 2023, excluding 2020. They find that since 2019, the average time an American spends outside the home decreased by 16%. In fact, 17 out of the 28 egg activities noted they showed significant changes between 2019 and 2023. While a similar pattern has emerged existed pre-COVID, the authors conclude that the circumstances of the pandemic seem to have accelerated existing trends towards staying home. Okay, well, that's a very concerning psychology news article because, as we know from our mental health research and everything that we know about mental health, it's absolutely critical that people like go outside, they see friends, they do activities that they like, and that's absolutely critical to maintaining our mental health, just so we don't feel lonely, depressed, and our mood doesn't drop, etc. So it's important that we do actually like go outside them, and it is very important that we do engage with our friends and other activities that actually get us outside the home. So I think that the takeaway from this psychology news section is that I would say that after you listen to this podcast episode, maybe think about your own life, think about your activities, think about what you do to actually get out of the house. And if there's not that much that you actually do, then maybe it's the time to like change that. Maybe reconnect with friends. Maybe plan some stuff with your friends just to get you out to like get you connecting and to get you interacting with the real world. Just you can maintain your mental health. So I really hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the person update. So moving on to the person update. Well, it's official. I officially have dyslexia and dyspraxia now, which I'm really happy about because on Tuesday I had my assessments. And yes, because it's me, I will be having a podcast episode on that in the future. I just need to write it for starters. So that might come out next Monday, actually. So, but the assessment went really well. It was actually quite funny in quite a few places there, because the woman was able to diagnose me with stuff quite quickly, especially because there's this really big test that you do in a like dyslexia or Pacific Learning Disability Assessment, because that's what it was actually called. And basically, you're given about 20 words that are fake words, they're nonsense words, but they're made up with specific sounds. So what you do is that you're meant to sound out the words, and you're meant to break words down just to see if you're able to read it. Well, that was challenging. I got like a third of the way through, and she said, "Should we just stop this?" Basically, and I was like, "Yes, please," because I was not getting any of these words whatsoever, and it was painful. It was very, very painful because I could not read these words whatsoever, ever though. The interesting thing was that in my pre-screening questionnaire, I'd mentioned some dyspraxia stuff about my coordination, my amazing sense of direction. I'm being very sarcastic there. I'm useless at senses of direction. Even sat navs can be quite challenging, especially when the line's too thin for me to be able to see that the roads actually like deviate from each other. So we got talking more about that, and the dyspraxia diagnosis was the one that I actually wanted them. So she was talking to me about that, and then like she turned to me at one point and said, "Well, that does make a lot of sense. Sense." And then like she was asking me, right, so you do meet the threshold for a dyspraxia diagnosis. Do you think that would be helpful to you? So I said yes, because to be honest, dyslexia isn't really the one that I wanted. It was more the dyspraxia one, because it does because like dyspraxia, it's all about the gross motor skills, and that does tend to fit me slightly better. But then as the test went on, especially when it got to the handwriting portion, oh, that was painful. That's when she offered me the dyslexia diagnosis, because there's like 10-minute freehand writing task, and she got back from like reading it, and she was like, "Has anyone ever mentioned your handwriting?" Writing up, and I was like, "Yes, I've never met a person who said my handwriting's good though." And then, yep, and then like I cannot remember for the life of me the condition which is related to fine motor skills. Skills that it's basically like the opposite of dyspraxia, and she was questioning me to see would I meet that diagnosis. But because my typing's really good though, and like my fine motor skills are reasonably good all round, like she didn't want to give me that, and I didn't want that one anyway, though. It was the dyslexia diagnosis that I wanted after that. Though. So it was interesting. I learnt a lot. It was a lot of fun because you got to learn a lot about yourself, but also how mental health assessments go. So I can definitely use that skills in the future. So it was happy. Then I've been doing a whole bunch of other things this week, including like getting back into quite a few projects. Or my specialist counselling also finished this week. This week then, so there was a lot of coffee and cake during that, and we were talking about mental health, the future of mental health services, and so many more great things. So I am looking forward to writing that up in the future. So it's going to be really good. And then it's the final week this week of the university term, and I'm looking forward to having my final lecture on successful aging, because my neuropsychology of like aging module has actually been really engaging. Quite heartbreaking because of how older people were treated by mental health services and the age-based discrimination. That's something I will talk about in the future. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave comments out of the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet on Twitter at sci-fi Wiley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by the Psychology World magazine. So this is one of my favourite psychology projects, projects that are going on though. So every single month I release this magazine. It's going to be about 50,000 words, and each issue of this magazine contains 5 psychology articles that based on podcast episodes, but then it also contains a brand new book released at least 2 weeks before the book comes out as standalone, and it also includes another book from the inventory, so a book that was released from the past. So for a bargain price, you can get 2 full-length psychology books and 5 psychology articles, and to be honest, this magazine is an absolute bargain. So if you wanted to get lots of great psychology books, lots of great psychological knowledge for a great price, then definitely check it out. So that is the Psychology World magazine, available on all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And I do flat out love putting together these issues of the Psychology World magazine, so I know you're going to love them too. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons, and as always, a massive thank you for my patrons, because your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you wanted to become a patron of the show and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/the Psychology World podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can buymeacoffee.com/Connor Wiley. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about lessons learned in 300 episodes. This is a brilliant one and I'm really excited about it. So in today's episode we're going to be looking at 5 lessons that I've learned, to be honest, in the past 100 episodes, but I have learned this throughout all 300. So let's dive into it. Key to knowledge is to always be learning. Something that has popped up a lot more times for me recently is just how much I love learning through this podcast, and it includes all the future blog posts that I've stacked up and that I need to turn into podcast episodes. This realization might be because I was talking with a lot of clinical psychology students that have had the exact same degree as me, but I was able to give a lot more insight, perspectives, and knowledge about different aspects of our clinical psychology, as well as our other subdisciplines. Yet these students can only talk in depth about the topics covered in our lectures. They had no idea how clinical psychology worked behind the scenes, different aspects of the mental health conditions, and other things. This was highlighted even more last night at a university social I attended with my older supervisor and all his current students that he's supervising. A lot of the students were making some comments about psychology and especially psychology careers that were slightly incorrect. But because I learned about those areas on the podcast and my interactions with the staff, I was able to carefully help them. I didn't want to be a know-it-all, but still. Ultimately, I know I say this a lot, but the main reason why I keep going back to my audio booth every week, thankfully without fail at the moment, is for the learning. I want to be a knowledgeable, aspiring psychologist, so in the future I can become a qualified psychologist. And the key to knowledge is learning. If I wasn't learning about the things that I was interested in, and if I didn't flat out love learning new things about psychology, then I wouldn't be doing this podcast. There would simply be no point whatsoever. And some of my favourite episodes that highlight this extra learning the majority of other students don't know includes what makes a trauma-informed psychologist, what are the advantages and disadvantages of clinical cutoffs, what's enhanced cognitive behavioral therapy. Therefore, like me, by listening to this psychology podcast every week, you are learning so much more than you realize, as well as that this knowledge could be really useful to you in the future, be it with conversations with friends and family, in a future job interview, or even in your current psychology or non-psychology job. Knowledge is power, and the key to knowledge is never stop learning. The mental health system is broken. One useful podcast episode that ties into this section is why is the police refusing mental health calls a bad idea? I admit that this might be a slightly odd change of tone, but this is the personal thing I've learned over the course of my psychology journey, especially the past 100 episodes, and even more so in 2024. Oddly enough, I'm not actually disheartened, rageful, or scared about this issue in the sense that I've lost hope. In fact, I'm very excited about the future because I have met, listened to, and read so many amazing people and future and qualified psychologists who are fighting like hell to transform mental health services for the better. For example, one of my personal favourites has to be Lucia Johnston for her work on formulation and how that is revolutionising the way we work with our clients and to create interventions and treatments with them. Yet there are other smaller names too, but that are just as important. Like when I did a work experience with the learning disability team and the gender identity clinic, I met so many amazing people that were working their socks off to serve their clients. They weren't all psychology people, but every single one of them was amazing. Therefore, as much as I've written in my books and I've spoken on the podcast about the immense issues in mental health services, I am hopeful for the future. There are a lot of great mental health professionals and students rising through the psychology ranks that have a burning passion to help make the world a better place and to make mental health as important as physical health. And yes, I know in the UK in the past year or two, legally mental health is just as important as a physical health treatment. But come on, just go into any NHS service and see the lingering impact of the biomedical model. Actually, try to access a psychological service within the NHS. I dare you. You will meet a lot of medical doctors offering you medical solutions and psychological referrals made by experts in medical conditions that will put you on waiting lists for 5 years or more. Whereas, as my housemates proved, if you go to see medical doctors about a psychological condition like depression, they will give you a medical solution within 5 minutes without a diagnosis or any psychological support. That is exactly what happened to someone I know. Psychological treatment needs to be a major part of psychological conditions. And I'm going to jump off that soapbox now. In addition, there are major issues with managerialism, understaffing, top-heavy organisation, and underfunding within the NHS that greatly restricts mental health services from what they need to be doing to improve lives, decrease psychological distress, and give their clients more adaptive coping mechanisms for their mental health difficulties. The system is broken because of these issues that plague it, and so many people who desperately need mental health support are being denied it because they aren't going to kill themselves. Yes, most of the time your mental health has to be that severe for you to access psychological support. Also, I know from personal experience that I've been denied anorexia support because I'm not severe enough. Some I need to go to get private, some I don't get hospitalised. Yet there aren't many eating disorder specialists in my area, let alone ones that I can afford. So I found one woman who I need to contact. Yet in this country and all over the world, everyone should be entitled to mental health support if they need it for free. Nonetheless, let me repeat myself here because I have said this before and I will always say this. I never want the NHS or any other mental health services to be disbanded or gotten rid of. There are immense issues with the NHS and other mental health services all over the world, but things can change and things are changing for the better. This just means that as aspiring and qualified psychologists, we must always be fighting for change. It won't be easy, and it will feel impossible 99% of the time, because we need dramatic structural changes to our mental health services. But as long as there are amazing people like you who speak up and fight the good fight, then there is hope. There is always hope that we can and we will fix the broken mental health system. Learning empowers you. This is another very personal lesson that I'm extremely glad that I've learned in the past 100 episodes, since the knowledge I've learned through this podcast has been immensely useful to me as a student, as an aspiring psychologist, as well as a survivor with my own mental health challenges. Knowledge and my constant learning on this podcast has empowered me with an understanding and a way to explore topics I need to explore for my own future and healing. For example, as a psychology student and aspiring clinical psychologist, I have flat out loved exploring various mental health conditions, types of therapy, and techniques. All of this learning has empowered me to have a drive towards wanting to become qualified. I have a good idea about what a clinical psychologist does, how they can change lives for the better, and I have a foundational understanding of all these things that I want to develop during or after my doctorate, during continued professional development. I'm not an expert, but because of the learning that I've done for this podcast, I have a good idea about what and why I want a career in clinical psychology. Without this podcast, I wouldn't know a fraction of the information I do about clinical psychology and the wider areas of psychology that we cover from time to time. Actually, come to think of it, this reminds me of how I describe the psychology of a podcast whenever I meet someone new and they ask what do I cover. I always tell them that the podcast is mainly about clinical psychology and it allows me to explore beyond my lectures and textbooks, and that is completely true because the podcast empowers me to go out and find this information that I wouldn't be looking at and researching otherwise. All of you wonderful listeners are another reason why I'm empowered to keep learning. Each a kind comment, each a thank you, and each time you reach out makes me want to do this even more. So thank you, dear listener. Finally, in the past 100 episodes, or to be honest, the past 300 episodes, has proved to me that time and time again, I've learned how this podcast is critical to my own mental health. Not only in terms of the great interaction that I have with all of you, which can really make me smile on my bad day, but for my own mental health struggles. When I was dealing with my childhood trauma after a breakdown in August 2023, this podcast was a great way for me to research what I was learning in that counselling about myself, how my past had impacted me, and how it was impacting my relationships right now. I'm grateful that I've had this podcast to help me learn and really understand what on earth I was experiencing. In addition, after my rape, this podcast has been a lifeline. Sure, me putting out a particular podcast episode on male rape on 6th of May 2024 did kill this podcast for months. The audience numbers have only recently started to recover, but I'm grateful that I've had this psychology podcast. I've written a lot of future blog posts that explore different aspects of the sexual trauma and how the body responds to trauma, and window of tolerance is a big concept. I wouldn't have researched a single one of those topics in any great depth without this podcast, and it would have been very damaging to my mental health. I wouldn't have been able to explore and understand why I was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, flashbacks, anxiety, and all the other negative mental health outcomes associated with sexual violence. There were a lot of healing moments in amongst all the darkness of my mental health because I was able to write podcast episodes. It made me feel a little less insane during the most intense and darkest moments of this year. This psychology podcast truly has been a lifeline to me over the past few months, so thank you for the bottom of my heart for listening. And some podcast episodes that highlight this empowerment through learning include why an erection isn't consent, what is post-traumatic stress disorder, what are some psychological treatments for eating disorders. The body is critical in psychological trauma work. Previously, I've mentioned that I wasn't a massive fan, or I didn't think that much about how our physical body fed into our mental health. Of course, I know that psychoeducation is flat out critical in clinical work with our clients. For example, when working with someone with an anxiety disorder, it's important to explain to them how the physical sensations of a panic attack and the physical feelings of being anxious is a physical manifestation of psychological states, as well as you can help our clients to look out for these signs so they know when to use therapeutic techniques, amongst other uses of psychoeducation. In addition, I understood that our physical and social environments are critical factors for our mental health. It's why I really like the systemic approach to mental health, because it proposes that if something happens in our social system, then it creates a ricochet effect that impacts the rest of the system. This was proved to me even more because of a social factor in my shared university house. It is the factor that is impacting my mental health and my eating disorder. It's starting to get to the point where I'm nervous to use the kitchen or make a mistake because someone in the house has OCD, and I don't want them to have breakdowns. So this makes eating and cooking even more stressful for me. Anyway, I suppose that I didn't understand how a physical body and environment has a lot of impacts on our mental health. It's why I really like the biopsychosocial model that works holistically to address all these different types of factors. However, it was only really after my sexual trauma with my post-traumatic stress, panic attacks, and more that I realized just how flat out critical our bodies are to our mental health. It is the physical sense of safety that I had lost, the constant tension and the constant physical tension in my body that really damages my mental health as well as the psychological processes. Therefore, one of the most important lessons that I've learned in the past 100 episodes is that if I get involved in trauma work in the future, I will focus a lot more on the physical body and how it impacts the clients. In fact, I will do this with all my clinical work in the future because the mind-body link has several impacts on our mental health. Some episodes that highlight this mind-body link includes what is psychophysics, how does trauma affect the heart, how to promote a healthy brain-gut connection. On the whole, to make this lesson useful and applicable to you, as much as I hate the biomedical model with all my heart, I want to highlight that we must always remember the psychosocial model. We must always strive to work holistically with our clients so that we address the biological, psychological, and social factors that make their mental health condition develop or to be attained. Just because we mainly focus on the world of psychology and social factors, there will be times when biological factors and our physiological responses play an important role too. Well, that is what this podcast has allowed me to learn and understand at a much deeper level than my textbook, lectures, and degree. Psychology is amazing. The final lesson brings together all of the lessons, so it will be shorter than some of the other sections. This podcast teaches me how psychology is amazing because it truly has the power to improve lives and save lives and transform lives for the better. Let's take depression for example. I went through so many depressive episodes earlier in the year, and it's awful. You don't have energy, motivation, and one day it took me 5 hours just to have a 15-minute shower. Also, it makes you feel like everything is bad in the world, it biases your views about the world, and it impacts the majority of your social relationships. However, it is psychology that shows us how to effectively treat depression through cognitive behavioral therapy, different techniques, and positive psychology can be immensely useful too. The reason why my depression stopped, or why I haven't experienced a depressive episode in months, is because of my specialist rape counselling helped me to heal, and I've learned a lot of self-soothing, positive psychology, and other techniques that help me to maintain my mental health. Medicine hasn't helped me. No medical doctor would have given me anything, and the root of my depression and trauma responses was a physical event, not a medical condition. It is psychology that allowed me to heal and move on. In addition, as an autistic person, certain parts of the medical community tend to see autism and other neurodivergent conditions as something that needs to be cured or fixed, yet thinking that there is something deeply and profoundly wrong with me isn't helpful or useful, and it only makes me feel awful. Yet modern clinical psychology has helped to foster a sense of acceptance, support, and that they want to help neurodivergent people to thrive. It is this positivity that does stretch through a lot of mental health settings, society, and different professions, including certain parts of the medical community that make me feel great. It is these techniques that have helped me to decrease my psychological distress, improve my life, and give me more adaptive coping mechanisms so I can heal and thrive and deal with stresses that come up along the way. Ultimately, without psychology and without this podcast giving me a way and a platform to learn about mental health, how to improve my life and others, and us having the knowledge to debunk a lot of the myths about everything that I'm experiencing, I do not believe I would be here. I think I would be dead a long time ago, but knowing everything I do about mental health, clinical psychology, and more helps me to know that it's okay to reach out for support. It's okay to have therapy, and therapy is far from the scary, mystical process that mainstream society treats it as such. Psychology has taught me a lot about what actually happens in therapy and why therapy is effective. So I know this isn't some random shot in the dark, like a lot of my non-psychology friends in apply way too often. And some podcast episodes that highlight this lesson includes what are 3 cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, how to survive a major depressive episode, what should a therapist tell clients in their first therapy session. Conclusion. I think it's clear at the end of this episode I have learnt a hell of a lot of things over the past 300 episodes, let alone the past 100. This podcast and all you great listeners help me to learn, support my mental health, and you all make me happy. It is our interactions, our conversations about episodes, and your thoughts and feelings that really delight me, because it shows me that this podcast is something people enjoy and it's making a positive impact on the world. And that's something that makes me really happy. All I want to do is have a positive, meaningful impact on the world. And I don't know where I heard it from. Maybe it was a film or something, but someone said along the lines that when we leave this world, we need to make it a slightly better place than we found it. I want to make sure that happens. So my books, my podcast, and me aspiring to be a clinical psychologist are just part of that goal. In terms of the future, I can already assure you I have no intention of stopping this podcast. I already have around another 30 blog posts written up that need to be made into podcast episodes at some point, and I have even more ideas for episodes in the future. Each of these episodes allow me to explore something in more depth and something brand new entirely, and that excites me. I look forward to sharing new content with you. I look forward to continuing my YouTube Shorts experiment, where I release a daily one for the foreseeable future, and I'm excited about the future of psychology. That really is something I am passionate about as well, and I hope you will want to come along with me for the journey. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because it was really great looking back on everything that I've learned, everything that I've taken away from this podcast, and I flat out love it. Love it. Like, I'm no intention of giving up the podcast for the foreseeable future, and I'm so grateful that all of you come here every week. You're listening, you're enjoying it. So please, always come back to listen, and always feel free to reach out, comment, tell me your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. And actually, you can also tell me some of your lessons from the past 300 episodes. I would love to hear it. So if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to know more, then please check out the Psychology World magazine, available in all the usual places. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, now you can at patreon.com/the Psychology World podcast. If you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Conor Wiley. So, have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwiley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.